I'm here with Vivek Tiwary, the author of the fifth Beatle, the Brian Epstein story.
Yes, indeed.
Welcome.
Thank you, Alistair. It's a great joy to be here. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you for coming to my panel.
Oh, it was most enjoyable.
Well, I enjoyed meeting you, and as you can probably tell, the fifth Beatle is a real labor of love for me. It's something I'm passionate about, so I love talking about it. So I was excited to hear that you wanted to talk to me.
Why did you decide to write this as a graphic novel and not a prose one?
So I'm a big believer in the power of graphic novels. I often say that I learned to read by reading comics. I've been reading graphic novels and comic books ever since I was a little kid. My earliest childhood memories of reading are reading Tintin books with my mom. My mom had a European background, so it's Tintin, but we called it Tintin. And I just believe that the medium is very powerful for conveying emotions and conveying poetry, if you will. And while telling the behind-the-scenes story of the Beatles is very important to me, how did Brian Epstein get them a record deal when no one wanted to sign them? How did he convince Ed Sullivan to book them when a British band had never made an impact in the United States? Those stories are fascinating and important, but more important to me is telling what I call the poetry of the story. Brian was gay and Jewish and from Liverpool, three significant obstacles in the 1960s that made him really the ultimate outsider, a misfit, an outcast. It was against the law to be gay. It was literally a felony. Anti-Semitism was prevalent in the country, and Liverpool prior to the Beatles was a port town without any cultural influence whatsoever. So Brian was literally a gay Jewish kid running around a dirty port town in the north of England saying, I found a local rock and roll band and they're going to be bigger than Elvis. They're going to elevate pop music into an art form. And to me, the fact that people laughed at him and said, that dream is stupid and people like you don't do things like that, and yet he chased that dream with passion and persistence, and the world got the Beatles. I found that incredibly inspiring. You know, as a young Indian kid running around New York's Lower East Side, not wanting to be a doctor or an engineer or going into technology, which is the things that young Indian people usually do, I wanted to write comics and produce Broadway musicals. So Brian Epstein's story was incredibly inspiring to me. And I would argue that for a graphic novel, if you want to convey not just the facts, but the poetry, the emotions, using art to do that is an incredibly powerful way to do that. Some pages that I like to show, literally what I'm talking about, when Brian first goes to the Cavern Club to see the Beatles perform. Andrew Robinson, the artist, did some amazing work here. So there's this, one of my favorite pages in the book is this one right here. And I would argue that of the countless books that have been written by the Beatles covering that night when Brian first went to the Cavern Club to see the band, I would argue that not one of those prose biographies captures the emotion as well as does this page of art by Andrew Robinson. And I'm taking myself out of it because, as you can tell, there's very little writing actually there. But I would argue that the sense of hope and possibility that this gay Jewish kid felt when he went into the Cavern Club and felt connected to the music is captured better in that page than in countless books that have been written. So to me, this page here shows you why we chose to do a graphic novel instead of writing a normal book. I know that's a long answer to the question, Alistair, but I hope that gave you the answer you were looking for.
What do you hope people will get out of your work?
So as I said, for me, the Brian Epstein story was an incredibly inspiring story. I discovered it when I was a business student. It was 1991 and I was attending the Wharton School of Business, and I was dreaming about having a career in the arts and entertainment industries. And in 1991, Wharton didn't really have a lot of resources for students who wanted to get involved in the business of arts. That's changed. The school has a number of resources for those kind of students now, but back then it was all about accounting and finance and banking. So I felt that I was a little bit of a black sheep and I had to take it on myself. So I started doing extracurricular studies and believing that the Beatles and their management team were the group that wrote and then rewrote the rules of the pop music business. I thought I should study the life of Brian Epstein. And initially, as I said earlier, I was looking for the business stories. How did he get them a record deal when no one wanted to sign them? How did he come up with the suits and the haircuts as a form of marketing? How did he convince Ed Sullivan to book them when a British band had never made an impact in the States? Those are the stories I was after, but it was uncovering the human side of his story that really struck a deep chord for me. And I said, as I said earlier, that's what I really related to, the sense of being an outsider. And if I had to boil down the Brian Epstein story into one message, I would say it's this. It's that no dream is too impossible and no person too unlikely to realize that dream. And that's the story that I learned from Brian Epstein's life. And it inspired me and it changed my life. And I'm hoping that I can convey that message to my readers. And if I can inspire my readers in just a tiny way, in the way that Brian Epstein inspired me, then I will have done a good job with my book. And that really has been my goal with The Fifth Beatle.
What is your reaction to the venue? This is much smaller than Boston Comic Con, so why?
Oh, it's been so much fun being here. I mean, to me, it might be smaller, but it's more intimate. You know, I feel that I'm actually able to have a real conversation with the people that have come up to me. Folks like you, we'll meet at a panel upstairs, and then all of a sudden here we are having a chat. It's been a really fun, really pleasant, really community-oriented experience here in a way that, quite frankly, I feel some of the bigger cons you get a little lost in that. There's so much going on, you don't really get a chance to intimately get to know some of the fan and pop culture that you came to see. So to me, this has been a great joy. It's been sort of the purpose of Comic-Cons is to connect with like-minded fans and projects, and I feel you can do that better in an intimate environment like Northeast Comic-Con. And also, it's worth remembering that this is comic and memorabilia, and for a fanboy geek like me, the whole memorabilia side of things has been incredibly cool. The Jaws exhibit's been amazing. The Batmobile, it's like Adam West being here. It's been a pretty awesome weekend. So I hope you've had as much fun as I've had.
I most certainly have. Thank you, Vivek. It's been a real pleasure.